Welcome back to BYU Hawaii's online economics course. Today, in this lecture, we're going to talk about markets. We're going to talk about the law of demand. These are concepts that are very graphically intense. If you find yourself being one of those many who are graphically challenged, I would encourage you that as we go through each one of the graphs, instead of just looking at it on the screen, take the time to pull out some paper, grab your pen or pencil, and draw the graphs themselves. Get used to drawing a traditional or typical demand curve, labeling it properly, understanding why curves move or shift and why we move along the lines. That will be largely the concepts that we're going to try and take away from the class session today. Let's talk about markets first of all, because markets are the real driving force behind how we set prices, how we understand what is going to be demanded, and eventually how we understand what is going to be supplied by consumers. In this example, consider back to the historical understanding of markets. Traditionally, in small communities, we lived where we had farmers, we had other merchants, we had ironmongers who obviously dealt with iron. We had other merchants who dealt with wood or who dealt with leather, made saddles, made horseshoes, various things. But what they did is they made their products and they all brought them to what was called the high street, the main street in a specific community. That was the market. The market was established for no other purpose other than to bring together buyers and sellers. And today, markets serve exactly the same purpose. We bring together buyers and sellers to a market where a buyer is able to communicate with a seller the price he's willing to pay. A seller is able to communicate with the buyer the price that they're willing to accept. And that's the functioning role of markets. Markets are nothing more than arrangements that individuals have for exchanging with one another. They represent this interaction of buyers and sellers for goods and services. You're very familiar with markets, although you don't often see them as being markets. The automobile market, the ability to go down to a local dealer and to negotiate and to barter with this dealer over the price of an automobile. Getting onto Craigslist and looking at the potential cars that are for sale in your area. Getting onto other sources online to be able to understand what the true value of the vehicle is that you're considering. These are all components of the automobile market. Very different from where it was when I was your age. The internet has created a situation where you can truly understand the market value of an automobile that you're going to go purchase. Healthcare market is different, but it still operates as a market. You go to your physician because you have a cold, because you've injured yourself, or for other reasons. You don't necessarily negotiate with your physician over the price of his or her services. But it's a market nonetheless. You are a consumer of the healthcare service. They are a provider of that healthcare service. And you go to their office acting as a market to exchange money for the services. Labor market is interesting. Labor market exists mostly unseen. Most of us don't go to a market and say, I'm willing to pay X dollars for labor, or I'm willing to provide my labor for X dollars. But the market exists nonetheless. Consequently, you're paid $7.25 an hour for the work that you do at PCC. That price, or that market price for labor, has been established through supply and demand, and sometimes through some government policy making. It establishes at a price of currently $7.25 an hour. The stock market is a very vibrant market. The stock market is where we go to buy shares of companies. You can have an account with E-Trade or Schwab or some other online trading firms where you put in an order to buy a share of General Electric. They automatically match that order with somebody who's willing to sell a share of General Electric, and the exchange occurs over their internet platform, and in a few days you get delivery of your stock certificate. These are all markets. They operate extremely efficiently. And we're going to talk about how they determine prices through an idea called the laws of supply and demand. We'll hit demand first, and then in our next discussion or lecture, we'll talk about the law of supply. What is demand? Now remember, we talked about schedules. All schedules are is a listing, a table of data. So we're going to talk about demand, remembering that any phrases that are read are phrases you're going to need to be able to define. They're also phrases that you'll have to put into practical experience or use in an everyday exercise on an exam to be offered to you later. So demand. It's a schedule, a table, showing how much a good or service people will purchase at any price during a specified period of time, other things being constant. Let's just give a little caveat of what that other things being constant means. We need to hold other factors constant. For example, if I were to say to you, what is the demand for seaside sandwiches if we raise your salary from PCC from $7.25 to $14.50? We can assume that if you're getting paid that much more, you'll eat fewer peanut butter and jam sandwiches at home, and you'll probably purchase more sandwiches from the Seasider. However, we need to hold other things constant. So in other words, what we're going to do is we're going to assume that you're not off buying a car, that you're not going to be buying more gas to go down to town more often. We're going to hold all those things as they were before, because we just want to study what your behavior is or what your demand is for sandwiches at the Seasider if we were to increase your income. That's what we mean by holding other things constant. The law of demand, which is probably obvious and intuitive to you, and we're going to put it into a graph. The law of demand says that quantity demanded, the number of sandwiches that we're going to purchase from the Seasider, is inversely, in other words, it moves in the opposite direction, is inversely related to price, holding all other factors constant. Let's stick with the sandwich example for a few minutes. What we're saying is quantity demanded is inversely related to price. So if price goes up for sandwiches, quantity demanded is going to go down. They move inversely in opposite directions of one another. What we're holding constant, we talked about this a second ago, but we hold income constant. If we're going to change price, we assume that income doesn't change. We assume that tastes and preferences, what's trendy, Ugg boots or automobiles or various other things, those tastes and preferences, they don't move. Prices of other goods don't move. And then there's a host of other factors as well that we just assume doesn't change. Now let's talk about a couple of different categories of prices. Relative price and money price. Relative price is the price of a specific good in relation to the price of another good. And we'll go through a table here in just a second and talk about how that works. You don't usually deal with relative prices. We did in a barter economy when we didn't use money. But relative prices are interesting to understand, not particularly practical, and we'll rarely ever use them in economics after this point. Money prices we'll use all the time. Money price is just the price we observe in today's dollars. And so money price is how many dollars are you going to give for that sandwich. Here's an interesting example of the difference between money price and relative price. In this example, you have DVDs and you have video cassettes. A lot of you are too young to understand and remember what a video cassette is, but you don't use them much anymore. Pretty much we're now all DVDs and Blu-rays. But what you see in this table under money price is that DVDs last year were $20. This year, they're $28. So what you've seen is a fairly significant increase in the price of DVDs from $20 to $28. At the same time, video cassettes were $10. Now they've gone up to $16. So in money prices, we can see a fairly significant increase in the price of both of these products. Now let's consider them in relative terms. In other words, what is the price of a DVD relative to the price of a video cassette? And the way we understand that is by just doing a little bit of simple math. In the first instance, we'll compare price from last year, and we'll take $20 and divide it by 10. So $20 is the price of a DVD last year. $10 is the price of a video cassette last year. So 20 divided by 10, that ratio is 2. Now we're going to do the same thing for this year, and that calculation is going to be $28 divided by $16. And what you see is that the ratio has actually gone down, where the price last year was 2.0. In other words, 2.0 was the number of video cassettes it took to buy a DVD. And now, this year, it takes 1.75. So what you see is that price in relative terms has actually gone down. Where price in money terms has gone up, price relative has gone down. So this is an interesting comparison. Now again, we probably won't use this much in the rest of the course. We'll be focusing largely on money prices. Now let's talk about the demand schedule. Remember, a schedule is nothing more than a table relating prices to quantity demanded. Again, it's an inverse law, which says if price goes up, quantity demanded is going to go down. We think about that intuitively, but just remember. We have to consider time dimension. What that means is we're assuming that this analysis takes place over a discrete period of time. We assume that it's constant quality units. In other words, in that discrete period of time, quality changes aren't taking place. We can take that demand schedule or that table and we can graphically represent it in what's called a demand curve. It's a negatively sloped line, which means it goes down from left to right. It shows the inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So here's a table. This is a schedule for demand that shows a number of different combinations of price and quantity demanded. And for the most part, we can interpret this table as being, this is an individual's demand schedule. And what it says is, here we have combination A, which says at a price of $5 for a memory drive or a pen drive, we're going to have demand of 10 units. So if a pen drive costs $5, I'll want 10 of them. However, if the pen drive costs $1, I'm going to demand 50. Now this is perfectly consistent with what we talked about as the law of demand, which says if prices are high, I'll demand less. If prices are low, I'm going to demand more. This is a traditional, typical demand schedule. If we were to take that schedule and graph it, we would see a line like this, which basically just says, hey, at $5, I was going to demand how many? 10. At $1, I was going to demand 50 of the pen drives. And so all along that line are the combinations we had in our demand schedule. And this is a traditional demand curve. Okay, let's talk about individual versus market demand. The previous curve we had was my individual demand for pen drives. And that's helpful, except for nobody's going to make a factory to produce pen drives for me. They'll make it for the market as a whole. So market demand is the demand of all consumers in the marketplace for a particular good or service, and in this case, pen drives. Summation of each price, the quantity demanded for each individual, is the market demand. In other words, if all the individuals in your class constituted everybody in the economy, we would sum up all of their demand at each individual price, and that would give us the market demand. So what we've done then, we've said here's our individual prices, here was my individual demand, and then someone else's individual demand. We're just going to sum all those up, and what that's going to give us is the market's individual demand. Market demand is where we typically tend to focus in economics. Graphically, here was my demand curve, here was our friend's demand curve. We can actually just sum these up as well and get a market demand curve. Now the market demand curve doesn't deal in individual units, they typically will deal in millions of units. So now we have a market demand curve where at $5, we're going to demand 2 million of these pen drives. Now if we go down to $1, we're going to demand 10 million of these pen drives. Consistent with the law of demand, which states price goes up, quantity demand is going down. If price goes down, quantity demand is going to go up. So here's our demand curve for pen drives. Now we're going to do some adjustments and scenarios around it. Let's consider, imagine that the Barack Obama administration says, we're going to give every student registered in college, university, trade schools, other schools, every student in the United States, we're going to give them a notebook computer. Okay. This is a factor other than the price of the good that we're considering, which is pen drives. So if some other factor other than price changes, we can show its effect by moving the entire demand curve. In other words, shifting the curve left or right. Now, it's important to pay attention specifically to what this is saying. If some other factor other than price, the reason is, if we were to change the price, go from 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1, we don't actually shift the curve, we're just moving. So at $5 per pen drive, we demand this much. At $4, we demand this much. So anytime we change the price of the good on the graph, and in this graph it's pen drives, all we do is move along the curve. Anytime we change anything else other than price, in this scenario, we're going to change by subsidizing computers, then we're going to shift the curve, left or right. So let's consider that example specifically. Here's our demand curve for pen drives. Now we're going to cause a subsidy or give students a laptop. Now just conceptually think through what that means. If we give students a laptop, they're going to need to share files. The likelihood of needing to share files causes the demand for pen drives to increase. So what that's going to do is going to shift the demand curve to the right. So this effect of this government policy of increasing notebook computer use is going to cause demand for pen drives, which was here, to move to the right. Now a note on this. Anytime our curves, either demand or supply, shift to the right, we're expanding the market. Anytime they shift to the left or back towards the axis, we're contracting the market. Again, anytime we're expanding the market, the curves are shifting to the right. Anytime we're contracting the market, we're going to shift those curves to the left. And indeed, what we did in this example, we gave PCs to everybody who wanted one at the universities and trade schools and such. That caused an increase in our demand for computers or for pen drives and shifted the demand for pen drives to the right. Let's consider a contrary example. If any of you have been in your classes where a lot of people use computers, all the computer laptops come up, everybody is feverishly tapping out their notes to their class as the professor is talking and teaching. But what we really found out is that they're really on YouTube, they're answering their voicemail or their emails, their voicemails, their Facebook responses. And so now what we've decided is President Wheelwright has created an edict, and he has said that there shall be no laptops in class. So parents will no longer buy all their kids' laptops to take notes on. You don't bring your laptops. You're not sharing as many files. So what that's going to do is, this was our demand for pen drives, and now that's going to shift to the left. We're going to contract the market demand for pen drives. Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. If it doesn't, work through a few more examples and we'll be in good shape. Let's hit this ceteris paribus condition again. Remember, the phrase ceteris paribus means just keeping other factors constant. We gave an example of what that means with relationship to the sandwiches and the sea cider. But determinants of the relationship between price and quantity that are unchanged along the curve, we hold constant. Always keeping them steady. We'll go through what that means here in the future. All right, some more terms. We're going to hit a few terms here. We're going to throw some graphs up and make sure that you understand them. Number one is normal goods. These are goods for which demand rises as income rises. 96% of all goods in the world are normal goods. Inferior goods are goods for which demand falls as income rises. So let's consider why this happens. Normal good. A normal good would be like, excuse me, gasoline. If your income goes up, you're going to take more trips to the town. You're going to do more trips to the North Shore. You're going to do more trips to the movie theaters. That's a normal good. As your income increases, your demand for that good also increases. Okay, think about what may be an inferior good. A good in which goods or a demand for this good is going to go down as your income rises. What would be an inferior good? Well, consider the fake Lucky Charms. The real Lucky Charms are addictive, are tasty. And when your income goes up, you go to the store and you no longer eat oatmeal and the other nasty cereals you ate as a child. You're now going to have Lucky Charms every morning. That's a normal good. Your income goes up, your demand for that good also increases. What about an inferior good? An inferior good would clearly be oatmeal, unless you're one of the very sick souls that like oatmeal. But an inferior good is oatmeal, or even those big bags of fake Lucky Charms, which taste a lot like styrofoam. Those are inferior goods, because if you have more money, you won't buy them. Your demand of those inferior goods will go down. Well, that's a definition of inferior good. Now think about this from the perspective that it works both ways. If income goes up, demand for normal goods also goes up. But remember, if income goes down, demand for normal goods also goes down. The case with inferior goods works the same way. If income goes up, demand for oatmeal as an inferior good is going to do what? It's going to go down. However, if income goes down, you no longer have a lot of money to buy Lucky Charms, the demand for the inferior good, the oatmeal, is going to go up. So think through that in your mind and make sure that it makes sense, and we'll be able to graph that here in just a few minutes. So what kind of things determine demand? Clearly income. We just talked about the normal good and the inferior good. Tastes and preferences. You know, what the stars are wearing and what they're not wearing. I went on a mission to Australia. In Australia, we found Ugg boots. Remember, this is in 1981. None of you were born. But in 1981, Ugg boots existed. They looked exactly the same as they do now. And almost every missionary to Australia has come back thinking, those are the coolest things. I wonder if we can get them to work here. And every missionary has tried to import a few of them to try and get them to take off, but it never works. As soon as Naomi Campbell walked around the streets of New York in Ugg boots, they instantly took off. The tastes and preferences, which are in many ways determined by our popular models and actors, changes things. That's what tastes and preferences are. The price of related goods, substitutes, complements. We'll talk about this in more detail in just a second, but a substitute is something that you buy as opposed to something else. So margarine and butter, they would be substitutes, because you don't buy both margarine and butter to put on your toast. You'll buy one or the other. Complements, on the other hand, you typically buy together. So if you buy butter for your toast, you're going to probably buy jam for your toast. If you buy an amplifier, you're going to buy speakers. If you buy a computer, you're possibly going to buy a printer. So those are complements. And we'll talk about those here in just a second in more detail. Substitutes are two goods that when the change in the price of one causes a shift in demand in the other in the same direction as the price change. So think of substitute starts with an S. Substitute starts with an S. Same obviously starts with an S as well. So that'll help you keep those straight. Okay, let's give some examples of complements. Two goods are complements when a change in the price of one causes an opposite shift in the demand curve for the other one. So think through that. Substitutes cause them to move in the same direction. Complements cause them to move in opposite directions. Now, let's talk about some other determinants of demand. This idea of expectations. This can cause people a little bit of trouble. Future price expectations. For example, if you think the price of gasoline is going to go up next week, you're going to go out and fill your tank today. So future price expectations cause a change in demand. Expectations of income. For example, if you think you're going to graduate in December and you're going to work for Goldman Sachs, you're going to get a great paying job, the expectations of higher income may cause you to go out and buy a car today. Product availability is also a determinant of demand. If you think things are not going to be available in the future, you'll buy it today. If you think the upgraded iPhone 4 is going to be available in December, then you won't buy it today, and you'll wait for the upgraded version to come out. The last one is market size. This is a fairly obvious one. All this says is that if there are more buyers in a market, there's going to be more demand. If there are fewer buyers, there's going to be less demand. And that's fairly intuitive and probably obvious. But if you consider the market for housing, you say, well, in 2000 to 2005, we actually had a lot more buyers of homes because we had very low interest rates and we had government policies that tried to encourage people to buy homes. It increased the number of people who were buyers of homes, increased the market size, which obviously increased demand. All right, we're going to go through a few shifts in the demand curve. Make sure you understand it, and then we'll finish up this section. Let's talk about income and a normal good. So this is an example of a normal good, and we're going to change income. So what happens if we increase income? What happens to the demand for a normal good? Well, here was our demand curve previously. Our income has gone up, and it's a normal good, so you know your demand curve is going to shift to the right. It's going to expand the market. Demand is going to increase. Here's your demand curve again. When your income falls, you have a decrease in income, your demand curve is going to shift to the left. The market's going to contract. There's going to be less demand. All right, let's talk about an inferior good. Make sure we get this one right. Okay, what happens to decreases in income? Here was your demand before. It's an inferior good. Here was demand previously. Now we're going to decrease income. Our income goes down. Consider that this is oatmeal. Our income goes down, so demand for oatmeal is going to expand. We're going to buy more oatmeal because it's an inferior good because our income has fallen. Now what happens when our income goes up? This is oatmeal again. Our income goes up. We're going to be buying Lucky Charms. We're not going to be buying oatmeal. So our demand curve is going to shift to the left. All right, tastes and preferences. This is an easy one. Hybrid vehicles. All of a sudden, Katie Holmes is driving around a hybrid. Now everybody wants to drive around a hybrid. So we go on out and we buy hybrids, despite the fact that the rational mind says you will never be able to make up the price difference in gasoline by owning that hybrid. We do it because all the cool people are doing it. So we buy hybrids. So here was our demand previously for hybrids. Now Katie Holmes is driving one. So what happens is the demand curve shifts to the right. The market expands, demand increases, and we all buy more hybrids. At the same time, since Katie's driving a hybrid, she's gotten rid of her Cadillac Escalade. So the demand for Cadillac Escalades or SUVs is going to be shifting to the left. We're going to contract that market. It's going to shrink. All right, here's going to be where things get a little bit more complicated. The market for substitutes. If we stick to butter and margarine, maybe this will make a little bit of sense. So what happens if we start out and both butter and margarine are $2 a pound? Now all of a sudden the price of margarine increases to $3 per pound. What happens to the demand for butter? In other words, the good on this graph is butter. This was our demand curve for butter. Now margarine, a substitute of butter, increases by 50% in price. What does that do to the demand for butter? Well, dramatically, it's going to shift it to the right. So now you can buy a substitute cheaper, so you're going to do it. Price of margarine has gone up to $3. Butter is still $2. So the demand for butter is going to expand to the right. Contrary, what happens in a market for complements? So we're going to consider the market of speakers and amplifiers. So what happens if you have a decrease in the relative price of amplifiers? So here's your market for amplifiers here, and now you're going to have a decrease in the price of amplifiers. So let's put this as speakers. You have a decrease in the price of amplifiers. These are complements. You typically buy them together. So if you have a decrease in the price of one of the complements, you're going to have an increase in demand for the other one. So amplifier price goes down. Demand for speakers is going to shift to the right, going to expand. The opposite also works. If you have an increase in the relative price of amplifiers, well, you don't have as much money to spend on speakers. So your demand for speakers is going to fall. The market for speakers is going to contract. Now let's just talk for a second about future prices. Interesting, a higher income or expectations of higher future prices will increase demand. Think through this one carefully because it causes a little bit of problem with people. But here was your demand. Consider gasoline. The expectations of higher prices of gasoline in the future causes you to do what today? Well, today it's going to cause you to go out and fill up your tank. So demand today is going to expand. The opposite also works. If in the future you think prices are going to go down, well, you're not going to fill up your car today, are you? You're going to wait until Friday and go fill it up when prices are lower. So immediately, if you expect pricing to drop in the future, this is your demand curve. It's going to shift to the left. So demand for gasoline is going to contract. In the market size and the number of buyers, we use the example of the housing industry and housing markets, and that works. Increases in the number of buyers causes an increase in demand. So there's more pressure on the market to expand. More houses get built, more houses get sold. If there's a decrease in the number of buyers of real estate now, which there is currently in the current market, then what's going to happen is this same market for housing is now going to contract and it's going to shift to the left. Now, we need to finish up this section by talking about moving on the curve versus shifts of the curve. So changes in demand versus changes in the quantity demanded. A change in demand is a shift of that curve left and right. A change in the quantity demanded is a movement along the demand curve itself. So a change in one or more of the non-price determinants, those are incomes, tastes and preferences, size of the market, they will lead to a change in demand. This causes a shift in the curve. Okay? A change in a good's own price, in other words, a change in the price of the good that we have on the graph, will cause a movement along the same curve. It does not cause a shift of the curve. Let's give just a simple example and then we'll close up this section of the lecture. Here's our demand curve, and what we're saying here is at $3 we're going to demand 6 million pen drives. Okay? And that's okay, but what happens if we change the price? What happens if we have a slight change in this price down to $1? Now at $1, what we know is, we go over here to the line, we're going to have 10 million pen drives demanded. Notice we moved along the curve. The curve did not shift. One more time. Anytime we change the price of the good on the graph, we move along the curve. Anytime we change any of the other non-price determinants, we're going to shift the curve. In the next lecture, we're going to talk about the law of supply and see if we can make sense of that. And then we're going to bring supply and demand together. And we're going to come back to talking about markets and how markets work. Thank you. We'll see you in the next time.